Mr. Sito Yipin, Ms. Cheng Li Hui, and Mr. Ang Wei Ngan have asked about the status of the KL Singapore High-Speed Rail Project, or HSR in short. Many Singaporeans are asking the same question, following numerous statements by Malaysian leaders on the HSR project over the past 2 months. These statements suggest that Malaysia no longer intends to continue with the project in accordance with what both countries agreed under the HSR bilateral agreement, or BA in short. Let me briefly recap what they have said. On 28th of May, Malaysian Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir announced in an interview with the Financial Times that the HSR project would be, I quote, dropped, and that it was, I quote, a final decision, but that this would take time because Malaysia had an agreement with Singapore. Dr. Mahathir was also quoted as saying that, I quote, it's not beneficial, it referring to HSR project. It's going to cost us a huge sum of money. We will make no money at all from this operation, unquote. He also said that Malaysia may have to pay, I quote, almost 500 million as a penalty, I quote, although he was unsure of the currency. On 1st of June, Dr. Mahathir reiterated that the decision to cancel the HSR project was done by the Pakatan Harapan government because, from, I quote, the very beginning, we campaigned on that issue, and we won't go away from the decision of the party, unquote. On 3rd of June, Johor Menteri Besar, Dr. Osman Sapian, was quoted in the Malaysian media as saying that, I quote, short-term losses of 500 million ringgit from terminating the HSR project were better than for the Malaysian government to bear the debt burden of more than 100 billion Malaysian ringgit, unquote, if we continue the HSR project. On 11th of June, in an interview with the Nikkei Asian Review in Tokyo, Dr. Mahathir then said that the HSR project was, I quote, postponed. Malaysian Transport Minister Mr. Anthony Loke and Finance Minister Mr. Lim Guan Eng later told the press on separate occasions that they, together with Economic Affairs Minister Dato Sri Muhammad Azmin bin Ali, would visit Singapore to discuss the HSR project. Various other reports then appeared in the Malaysian media, citing an alternative proposal to the Malaysian Council of Eminent Persons to utilize the existing double track of KTMB to run trains at 200 km per hour, which would take 130 minutes to travel from KL to Singapore. According to these media reports, the alternative plan would purportedly mean that Malaysia would, I quote, not need to renegotiate with Singapore, unquote. Malaysia's social media also carried articles stating that Singapore has a, I quote, moral responsibility not to bully Malaysia, unquote, and to cancel the HSR project with minimum penalty. Mr. Speaker, when Malaysia proposed the HSR project to Singapore in 2013, Singapore agreed because we were convinced of the benefits of the project to Singapore. After several years of discussion, Singapore and Malaysia signed the HSRBA in December 2016. This bilateral agreement is an international treaty that is binding on the countries that signed it. In other words, both Singapore and Malaysia are legally bound to perform our obligations under the bilateral agreement, regardless of any changes in government. The HSR project agreed under the bilateral agreement is a high-speed rail that would allow travelers to commute from Jurong Lake District in Singapore to the Bandar Malaysia development in KL in 90 minutes. The key success factor of this project is the 90-minute travel time that provides greater convenience for travelers. 90 minutes is significantly less than the travel time by road or by the existing railway, and is competitive with the 50-minute flight time between Changi Airport and KL International Airport, plus airport transfers. To achieve the 90-minute travel time, trains operating the HSR's international express service between Singapore and KL have to run at speeds of 300 km per hour or more on a dual track line designed for a top speed of 350 km per hour. This requirement is essential, as otherwise it would make less sense for a traveler to make a day trip from Singapore to KL or vice versa using the HSR rather than by air. After signing the bilateral agreement, Singapore acquired land to facilitate the construction of the HSR, passed legislation in Parliament, and set up an infrastructure company, SGHSR Private Limited, under LTA. We have formed a team of more than 100 specialists in the company to build, own, fund, and maintain the HSR civil infrastructure in Singapore. These staff have worked hard to fulfill our obligations to meet a challenging implementation timeline. The tenders for the HSR civil infrastructure in Singapore, as well as the joint tender with Malaysia to appoint an assets company or assets co, are underway. By May this year, SGHSR had called 5 tenders to construct the HSR civil infrastructure within Singapore. We have also started engaging potential bidders for the remaining major tenders. All these works cost money, including costs for consultancies to design the civil infrastructure, costs for dedicating manpower to oversee and deliver the project, and costs for land acquisition. Based on preliminary estimates, the total cost incurred by the Singapore government for the HSR project has already exceeded Singapore $250 million by the end of May 2018. This is actual money that has already been spent, our taxpayers' money. We can recover value for some of the expenditure, even if the HSR project does not proceed. But a significant amount which has been spent will be completely wasted expenditure if the project does not proceed. The bilateral agreement provides for how compensation is to be dealt with. This is why we sent a diplomatic note to Malaysia on the 1st of June to seek immediate clarification on Malaysia's position. To date, Singapore has still not received a reply from the Malaysian government. The public statements made by the Malaysian ministers and Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir himself on the termination of the project have not been followed through with any official communications to us. At this point, therefore, we have been left with no choice but to continue performing in accordance with the bilateral agreement, and thus continue to incur more costs. In the month of June, we incurred more than Singapore $6 million. For the month of July, this month, we expect to also incur more than 6 million Singapore dollars. These costs will increase rapidly with time. From August to end of this year, we will need to spend at least Singapore $40 million more. These include our ongoing manpower costs, operating expenses, and contract costs. It will be most unfortunate if Malaysia has in fact decided to terminate, but delays in notifying us because there will be further wasted expenditure. The HSR bilateral agreement is a fair treaty with equal rights and obligations on both sides. It is worth noting again that it was Malaysia which had suggested the HSR, and Singapore agreed to the joint project. If the HSR project is terminated because of the actions of country A, then country A should compensate country B for expenses that have already been incurred by country B in accordance with the bilateral agreement. It would not be fair for the taxpayers of one country to bear the cost of another country's actions. Compensation is not a penalty imposed on the other country. Thus, should Malaysia cause the HSR project to be terminated, we will deal with the question of compensation from Malaysia for costs incurred by Singapore in accordance with the bilateral agreement and international law. The Singapore government has a duty to all Singaporeans to be accountable for the substantial public funds spent on the HSR project. Because the cost that we have incurred will add to the total amount of compensation, it is in Malaysia's own interest to officially inform us of its position on the HSR project early, to minimize the amounts involved. I highlighted this consideration to Economic Affairs Minister Dato Sri Muhammad Asmin bin Ali when he called me on the 6th of June. Dato Sri Asmin Ali suggested that both countries' officials meet to discuss the HSR project. I welcome the suggestion. I asked him for details on the scope of the discussions so that the meeting could be productive. He agreed and promised to send me a letter on the details. Our High Commissioner in KL has also conveyed the same points to Malaysian Transport Minister Mr. Anthony Loke and Finance Minister Mr. Lim Guan Eng. However, we have yet to receive the details from Malaysia. Besides costs incurred by Singapore, rail consortia from China, Japan, Europe, and other interested parties, such as international financial institutions, have also been incurring costs preparing their bids for the HSR Assets Company or Assets Co-tender, which was jointly launched by Singapore and Malaysia last December. These companies have taken the HSR project very seriously, including working with their governments to seek clarification on the requirements of the HSR Assets Co-tender over the past 7 months. Following the recent statements by Malaysian leaders, the bidders have sought urgent clarification from Singapore and Malaysia on the status of the HSR project. I understand their deep concerns. It's not tenable for them to proceed with their bids without knowing if the project is off, or to put their consortia and resources on hold indefinitely with the attendant opportunity and financing costs. The Singapore government will continue to press for official clarification from the Malaysian government. There are appropriate processes at law in case Malaysia should wish to propose changes to the bilateral agreement or to terminate it. These due processes should be followed. If the Malaysian government fails to provide an official response, then we cannot ignore the public statements made by the Malaysian ministers and Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir himself on the termination of the project, and Singapore will act according to its rights. Let me now update members on the JB Singapore Rapid Transit System Link, or RTS Link for short. Every day, several 100,000 commuter trips are made between Singapore and Malaysia through our land checkpoints. When completed, the RTS link will ease congestion significantly at our land checkpoints and make it much more convenient for people to travel between Singapore and JB. On 30th of May, Malaysian Transport Minister Mr. Anthony Loke told Channel News Asia that, I quote, "The RTS will proceed. Although Malaysia would have to restudy the project in terms of costs and so on," unquote. The following day, he also told our Shin Min newspaper that he hoped the project could be accelerated. However, we have not heard anything officially from the Malaysians on their intentions on the RTS link. To proceed or indeed speed up the project, many implementation issues have to be sorted out. As with HSR, we also have an RTS link bilateral agreement with the Malaysians. It was signed just in January this year. Under the terms of the agreement, Singapore's SMRT and Malaysia's Prasarana Malaysia Berhad needed to incorporate a joint venture company to become the RTS link operator by June 30th this year. That did not happen, as Prasarana had suspended discussions with SMRT after Malaysia's general elections. This means that both countries should now proceed to call an open international tender to appoint the RTS link operator unless we mutually agree on a postponement of the deadline. In the meantime, we will continue to work with Malaysia to reduce congestion through other means. Earlier this year, both Singapore and Malaysia lowered the tolls during off-peak hours at Tuas checkpoint to encourage motorists to travel outside the peak periods. We also agreed to Malaysia's suggestion to increase the number of KTMB Terbau shuttle services from 26 to 31 daily, which has been implemented since middle of February. These measures have helped to alleviate the congestion, but they are not a complete solution. We look forward to the completion and operation of the RTS link, which will be able to transport 10,000 travelers per direction per hour between Singapore and JB. Mr. Speaker, sir, cooperation between Singapore and Malaysia is mutually beneficial for our peoples, but it has to be based on the cardinal principle of respecting the sanctity of international law and international agreements. For Singapore, we also need to safeguard Singapore's hard-earned reputation as a credible and consistent partner and a country that abides fully by our international obligations. Both Malaysia and Singapore urgently need to answer the questions from interested bidders for the HSR Assets Gold tender, and we await Malaysia's clarification so that as responsible partners who have called the tender, we can do so. Meanwhile, we continue to incur costs on the HSR project as we conscientiously fulfill our obligations under the HSR bilateral agreement. These costs will add to the compensation which Malaysia would have to pay should it cause the project to be terminated. It is therefore in Malaysia's own interest to clarify its position early.